Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to be doing episode 2 of So You Want to Be a MATLAB God? And in this episode today, we're going to be going over the basics of how MATLAB functions work. We're going to be using a handful of built-in functions and kind of showing the basic construction of how those work in MATLAB. MATLAB has quite a plethora of built-in functions, and I'm sure there's way too many that I will ever use, but it's a very friendly language in the sense that there's a built-in function to do just about anything, and so a lot of basic algorithms you actually don't even need to build because MATLAB simply just has a built-in function that will do the same thing. So to get right in it, we have in comment right here the basic anatomy of a function. And as you can see, we have our output over on the left-hand side of the equal sign, and then we have the function with the given arguments on the right-hand side. So looking at the right-hand side, we have some made-up function. I called it func. And then in MATLAB, generally, you have soft parentheses following the name of your function, and then on the inside you can have arguments, and you can have as many arguments as you need. However, it is important to note that the MATLAB built-in arguments are going, or MATLAB built-in functions are going to have a certain number of arguments for them to work properly. So as you can see here, we have argument 1 and argument 2. So for instance, if I had a function that summed two numbers, I could have sum and then parentheses, I could have 1 and then 2. And then if I ran it, it would then sum them and just give me 3 as my answer. But since we just have an arbitrary function, we don't know what it does, but we know it takes a handful of arguments and then spits out multiple outputs as well. So we can also have multiple outputs from MATLAB functions, and those are denoted by having a hard bracket and then a variable name for one of the outputs and a variable name for the other output, and so on and so forth. You can have C, D, however many you want. And then MATLAB will fill in each of these, and each of these will be their own variable. So that's very cool. However, as we did in the previous episode, if you only have one output, you do not need to do this thing with the hard brackets. So now we're going to get into a very commonly used function in most programming languages. If you were to make any sort of program where you needed an input from the user, you would use the input function. So we're going to say that our response is going to be equal to input, and then we're going to say, give me the number. And then because it's going to format exactly as you type it here, and so we're going to do a colon and then a space so that it looks nice. And of course, we're going to close the parentheses, and then let's do that. And then we're going to run this. And then as you can see in the command window, it says, give me the number. And so I'm going to give it 8. And then if we look in our workspace, we can see that we have the number 8 as our response. So that's really cool. And then we can use response later in the code to do whatever we want with it. So now let's say, for instance, that we give it a bad input because it wants a number. It doesn't want a string, it doesn't want a Boolean, it wants a number. So we're going to give it number. And then we go and do that, and it doesn't like that. And so it errors, and then it prompts us once again. So we're going to give it 5. And then as you can see, our response is now 5. So if you don't want your MATLAB code to error, you have to give it the proper input that it is asking for. So we'll give it 60 again, and then as you can see, it works just fine. But you can allow it to give you a string, and we do this by adding the extra argument s in the single quotations, which denotes a string. And so now, if I go to run this, I can give it anything I want. I can give it the, and then as you can see, the response is the, and I can also, this is very interesting, this can be very useful for some of your codes. It says give me a number. I don't have to give it a number, but I still can give a number, so I'll give it 45. And then as you see in the workspace, it's still not a number, even though I gave it a number, it's still saved as a string. But one thing we can get into our next function with this is we can convert this into a string, even though it is, or into a number, even though it is a string. So we're going to say number is equal to, and the function is going to be called string to number, denoted by str to num. Very simply, and we can say response. And so now we are going to give it 45. And then as you can see in here, our response is a string containing the characters 4 and 5. And then our number then, after we converted it to a string, is 45. So that's really cool. But say we have then the number and it's stored as a double, and we want it to then be a string. We can then change that and we can say letters is equal to num to str of number. And so then we go and run it, and we give the number 45 once again, and oh, forgot to hit the semicolon there, and so as you can see that came up in the command window, and as you see we changed 45 from the number back into a string. So that's really cool. So another cool function that we can use is we can generate a random number. So because I don't feel like typing this in every time, I'm gonna hit comment on that. And so we can say randnum is equal to randy and then 5. And we need to hit comment on those so those don't error. And so it's going to give us 5, say, but it doesn't always give us 5. You see, it gives us any number between 1 and 5. So that's pretty cool. So you can also give more inputs to the Randy. So you can give it, say, 5, let's say 5. So give us a 5 by 5 of random numbers between 1 and 5. So basically the first argument would be the number range, so it's 1 to whatever number you specify here. So if I said 10 instead, it would possibly have numbers up to 10, and then it's going to be a 5 by 5 matrix. We're not going to get too deep into what matrices are because we can worry about that in its own episode. Once again, as you can see, we have some higher numbers in our little matrix there. So another cool thing in MATLAB, so you might know of a function, but you don't necessarily know how to use it. And so if you don't, you can either go to the MathWorks website, or in the command window, you can simply type help. And as long as you know the name of the function, I know it is Randy. And so you do that, hit enter, and then a whole little list of how to use the function will pop up. And as you can see, that can be very nifty. As you can see here, we have Randy, the maximum, and then you can even give it a vector, but that's not important right now. Yeah, so another really cool tool we can use is the fprintf tool. So we use this to write hello world, but there's so much more that fprintf can do besides just write hello world. So there's also a lot of formatting things. So it's actually what like the F in fprintf is for. It's for you can format, and then you can format how you print what you want. So for instance, say I want to, let's print the or something, and then is, and then I don't know, num, just cause this is something really random. So we can hit this and it says the number is num. But if say I wanted this num to be one row down, I can do a little hack inside of this, and I can hit \n, and then it will move num down. And generally, at the end of every line of fprintf you run, you generally hit the /n, just because you don't have these little 2 arrows right here, because it just kind of looks goofy. So the next thing we can do is we can dedicate certain spaces to either numbers or strings within fprintf. So let's make a number. We'll call the variable 1, and we'll say it is 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we'll have variable 2, which is 2. And so now we're going to go within our fprintf and say, and we can then have a placeholder inside of fprintf, and we're going to have %f, and then we're going to have space and %f again, and then we can have the second argument of variable 1 and variable 2. And so then if we were to go and run this, as you can see, it puts those in, which is pretty nifty. But as you can see, it also carries a ton of extra decimal points, which we don't need. And so one thing cool we can do is between the percentage sign and the F, we can specify how many spaces we want to take up. So say we want to take up 10 spaces, we can say 10, or 10. And then we want 0 decimal places because we don't actually need them, and so we do .0. So this would then, variable 1 would be 10 spaces taking up, and then it would have 0 decimal places. And we can do the same thing for this, and we would expect to see exactly like this. Pretty nifty. And so another thing we can do is we can do the same thing with strings here. And so let's go here and let's hit /n so we can start a new line, and fprintf, and we can say hold a string, and we will want %20s. So s denotes a string in this case, and then we'll hit /n so we get a new line, and then we can make a new insert a string, say number. So now we have number right here. And so one thing that is cool we can do is we can easily make tables. And so let us get rid of these real quick and say fprintf, and we can say say 5s /n, and then we'll say, %/s, and then we can tab with /t, and then we'll have %5s again, and then we're going to have var1 and var2. Also make sure we have the /n here, and then we can say fprintf, and we can do %5.0f /t %5.0f, then /n, that we can do var1, var2. And so then if you run this, it's going to actually look, they're going to line up properly. And so you can use this to format things into tables, and there's a lot more you can do with this if you really want to get into it, but just very simply, this is kind of how fprintf works. So there's a whole giant plethora of other MATLAB built-in functions that you may or may not use, a whole bunch. Generally, if you have something that you want to try doing in MATLAB, generally a good idea to just Google search or go to the MathWorks documentation and just straight up type like do this in MATLAB, and then generally you'll either find a function or someone will have typed out some sort of short algorithm to do whatever you need to do. So that is all I have for episode 2. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please like, favorite, subscribe, and I hope you stick around for future episodes. Have a nice day.